Welcome to Talk the Talk, calling all activists and allies alike. It's time to come together and demand the changes we need in this unjust world. I'm Jordan, a black male activist.
And I'm Kaitlin, a white female ally. And together we created Talk the Talk, a platform for speaking candidly and constructively on race.
We're going to provide starting points for uncomfortable but meaningful conversations and introduce new knowledge and perspective.
We will arm you with the tools necessary to combat racism anywhere and anytime you experience it.
Right now is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create lasting change to the racial and social injustices in America. We challenge you to do your part and talk the talk. What's up, Kay?
Hello.
How you feeling today?
Listen, it's a great day for a great day, so let's be great today. Does that sound familiar?
I do think I've heard that one. Said it myself a couple of times.
That's only a couple though, right? Only a few.
Just a few. It's good to see you.
Great to see you. Or, oh my God, sorry, that was Will's line. Good to be seen. I just ripped everything from your other podcast.
Shameless plug, Secure the Bag, STB podcast. For all those that don't know.
Shout out Will.
Shout out Will, the homie. So we got a great show planned today. I'm quite excited for it. Is there anything we have to catch up on before we get into the episode?
I just hope that you're enjoying your summer 2020 and living
it's like the best summer of all time, been locked in my house for almost 4 months. So a lot of vacations to the basement and around the block. Really big plane.
You have your backyard. It's grilling season.
Yeah, I feel like it's been extra hot this summer, like extra hot.
I'm just waiting for those, the cicadas to come out and the
murder hornets come back?
Yes, I was about to call them mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are already deadly and they already exist. I'm just waiting for those things to happen.
I mean,
July, what you got for us? I'm scared.
The good thing is, you don't have to travel anywhere, so that's good. Like, you don't have to worry about filling up your car, getting your car. I haven't driven my car in weeks. It's been in the same spot.
You need to drive it, apparently. Okay.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Not new driver. Hate driving. Had to drive because I lived in Charlotte. You have to drive it, apparently, or like the wheels get wonky, allegedly.
Everything bad happens.
Yeah.
You have to keep things moving, so within the car. So I'll do that at some point today, maybe. I don't know where I'll go.
You should go to Wissahickon. Should we bleep that out? Are we allowed to talk about, do people want to know where you are? I don't know.
I don't care. I live in Philly. We're good.
Too many true crime podcasts, I guess. Sorry. Okay, so Jordan was talking about that we have an exciting episode. Our episode today is why aren't good cops enough? And Jordan and I thought, again, we talk about it all the time. We're friends, but we come from very different worlds, that we should talk about our experience and how we were taught as kids about what to do and how to interact with police officers and what that looks like in our world. So I don't know, Jordan, if you want to kick it off or if you want me to go first, but.
You can go first. I am going to guess that there is going to be some stark differences.
Oh, you think maybe just a little bit?
Just a little.
Just a couple, tiny little things. So I was always taught, if there's an emergency, you find a police officer or you find a mom, little kid, you get separated from your parents, you find a police officer or you find another mom. You don't go up to a rando man. And that cops were always there to help you. However, when I got my driver's license and started driving around, and I know it varies state by state, but for the longest time as a North Carolina new driver, I couldn't drive at night. My curfew was 9 o'clock or something like that. Once that was lifted, my parents said, listen, if you're ever driving at night and you see cop lights behind you, call 911 because you need to confirm that they're a cop and that people, know that you are getting pulled over. So they were listen, sketchy shit has happened where people will impersonate police officers and kidnap you, assault you, or horrible things.
All the crime junkie stuff that you've heard.
I've watched listened to too many murder podcasts type things. Or it's also just good to know that people know where you are and that when you're getting pulled over,
sure,
hey, people know what's going on, whatever. Which I am really glad I know that, because I got pulled over once in high school and it was awful. And the guy was such a jerk. It was like Sunday morning. I had crutches because I had a terrible like ankle injury from playing soccer. I had a Bible in the passenger seat, and like this cop was giving me the hardest time. So we had like those custom license tags. And I also know, sidebar, I recognize and understand my privilege when I tell this story. So like, let's be real. We had this like custom license tag where it has like a sports team on it. And my dad had just gotten it and he hadn't signed it. This cop like would not, and I like could not find the registration. He wouldn't let me call my dad to ask where it was. He was just like the biggest piece of shit. Not that all cops are that way, which we'll have a disclaimer on that also. Also, disclaimer, we cuss sometimes. We didn't do that. So I have a million times. So sorry. And I totally recognize like that interaction could have been if he was like that with me, a 16-year-old driver on a Sunday morning on the way to church, like imagine how this person acts in other circumstances. So not great. And I think that really warped and changed what I thought of and what I was told, that police officers are there to help you. And like I said, I understand that my instance was very trivial in the broad spectrum of like police brutality. And I wouldn't even call that brutal, but I was scared. I was like sobbing. I was like, I don't know, just let me call my dad. And he gave me like multiple tickets and clearly had an ego issue. I'll say that. But that really changed like what I thought about how I interacted with police and how police interact with citizens. I was like, this is.
Well, I think you hit it on the head. Like you talked about ego, and ego is just a human characteristic. Some people are able to control theirs and some people aren't. So I think you have to remember that cops are people. They're humans, like just like every one of us. So they could have implicit biases. They could have them and recognize them. They could have them and not recognize them. They could be having a great day and let you go pretty easily. They could be having a bad day, and they have the authority, and that authority is all too often mixed in with their emotions and their implicit biases. So I was taught that. I was taught those things at a very early age. It wasn't taught in that way with those words, but I was taught like, hey, like you call the cops if you absolutely have to. And the education for me didn't come only from my parents. It came from my friends, their older siblings, my older cousins. And everyone was like, yes, you call the cops if you absolutely have to, but avoid the cops.
Right.
You don't know which police officer is going to show up on a given incident. You don't know what their emotions are for that day. You don't know what that person's implicit biases are going to be. And you don't know how all of those things are going to come together and impact you. So policing was very different for the two places that I grew up. When I grew up in the city of Reading, it was, you see 50, like, go inside. Get inside your house, shut the door, get away from the windows. You don't know what's going to happen. Now, moved out to the suburbs, where I grew up in Wyomissing, 10, 15-minute drive, but a completely different world. When I lived in Reading, it was mostly Black and brown people. When I moved to Wilson, or to Wyomissing, it was very, very white. And there weren't police. Like, it was very weird to see a police officer. It was like seeing a leprechaun. Like, it was something that did not happen. Like, there was one police officer that lived around the corner from us, and he kept his car at the house. And that was really the only time you would ever see a police car in that area. So it was just so different. Like, I had to take my education to and apply it to two different areas of my life. Like, when I went to see my friends and family in Reading, it was like, okay, I'm on high alert, but like, it's only if the cops come and engage us, then you have to be on high alert. If I saw a cop on the street that my parents live on now, I'm automatically on high alert because there are not cops. And that's like a whole nother thing that we could talk about is, where police are and where they are not, where there's a large police presence and where there's not. So I can't imagine that there's really too many other reasons that went into the different police education that you had versus what I had, other than rape. So yeah, I will leave that where it is, and we'll keep moving forward. Kaitlin alluded to it. Our title question for today: why aren't good cops enough? And what we're trying to get to the bottom of is, yes, there's this theory that there are bad apples in the police, but why do those bad apples just continue to spread? And why can't the good cops stop the bad cops? Why can't, like, the good apples never stop the bad apples? And I'm talking literally just about apples now. Put one bad apple in a basket, the good apples are not going to come and make that bad apple good again. So that's just like my one little, very like low level combat to the bad apples theory, that there are just some bad.
And like, neither Jordan and I are disputing the fact that you may have a family member, whomever, a friend, whatever.
Hey, I do.
That's not a good person to their core, whatever that looks like, it means to you based on your like morals. But like,
they could have joined the force, they could have become a police officer for the best reasons with the best of intentions.
Right. We're not gonna argue semantics on the fact that, like, yes, we understand that when you look at a large sample size of any kind, there's going to be the bad apples, right? Our question is looking at a larger picture and saying, okay, within this system, why aren't the good cops enough to stop these, let's just like these murders?
Right.
Let's call it, I mean, and we can go, there's other things that are problematic about it, but I think where we are in America right now with the murder of George Floyd is that we're talking about the unnecessary death of.
It's death, it's brutality.
Yes.
We're gonna get into more than just the murders. We're gonna talk about the brutality. We're gonna talk about the training. We're gonna talk about the motives of police and how they're incentivized. And it's all gonna tie together to answer the question, why aren't good cops enough? So moving into this, we got to talk about the history, right? Like, we have to spend some time on how police came to be a thing in America, because as we did in our first episode, we talked about how slavery has impacts on everyday life today, 401 years later, since 1619, when the first 20 slaves were brought to America. Policing is no different. So do you want to tackle this as the historian, or do you want me to go ahead? I'm cool either way.
You know that I have my PhD in podcast history. You can kick it off.
Let's tag it up. You go first, though. Go ahead, get us started.
Okay. So, like Jordan and I kind of mentioned, our different educational, like how our parents and communities taught us about what policing was. The history of policing, not just in the U.S., but again, like I said, none of us know everything. Neither of us know everything there is to know about history. Look things up. We used Time and the Britannica Encyclopedia to give us some guidelines and parameters for what we're talking about today. So we encourage you to look things up, but
do your research.
Do your own research. While yes, we appreciate that you trust us, you should figure it out for yourself. The history of policing was that, again, is all Eurocentric, but that everyone in the community participated in night watches. There was a community investment in making sure that everyone was safe, and what safety looked like varied, of course, on where you lived. So when you think the British colonies, so like the 13 original colonies, that was probably like, hey, there are some native people who are pissed that you took their land. So, like, let's make sure
they might come try to take this stuff back.
Yes. Like, let's, protect our colony. Again, the air quotes, protect our colony from these night raids that could happen. That's just an example. But the point is that the entire community was invested in the safety of the community from whatever those perceived threats were.
And that community is defined by, what you look like, what your economy is on. And it's based just on similar characteristics against an other, correct? In this situation.
Correct. And I would say like the one thing to note is that for a very long time, like think back to like the ancient Greeks, ancient Romans, there wasn't a socioeconomic stratification, meaning that like everyone in the community participated in these like night watches or night watch is the best way, but they all participated. It didn't matter if you were the richest of the rich or the poorest of the poor. In theory, again, asterisk, because
it did.
Then, but in theory, that everyone wanted to participate and protect the community. As the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, meaning that stratification happened, the rich people became less incentivized and interested in participating, seeing those night watches as something that a lesser would do. You know, like, I don't need to do that. I don't want to do that. I've got money.
I'll pay someone to do this. I'll pay.
Exactly.
Honestly, oftentimes, the people, at least in America, that were part of these night watches were criminals themselves, were people who were just looked down upon, and that was the job that they were able to get because no one else wanted to do that.
And also, those people a lot of times didn't say that they were participating in that kind of stuff because it was like
it wasn't something that you were like, you weren't proud to be on the Night's Watch. It was literally like Game of Thrones. Like the Night's Watch of Game of Thrones.
Go to the wall.
So it's exactly. It's the people who were in Game of Thrones, bastards, thieves, murderers, like criminals were sent away to be the Night's Watch in Game of Thrones. For anyone who didn't watch, like, okay, it's fine, go watch it, do whatever. But it's the same type of principle of what the colonies started with their own night watch. It was people that were cast down, either no fault of their own, and they were just like lesser, quote unquote, again, or they had actually committed crimes, and this was their punishment, was to have this job. So it wasn't a sought after job. Oftentimes the people that were on these jobs didn't care about it, so they would either sleep, they would get drunk. They didn't really give a damn. And also, like, they weren't out solving crimes. They were there to prevent gambling, prevent prostitution, prevent, honestly, whatever was considered a immoral act. Whatever it was for that day, for that time, is what the Night Watch was aimed to stop from happening. And then it wasn't a organized thing. It wasn't an organized system at this point. It wasn't even publicly funded. So you start to see that kind of change as the American economy starts to grow, and the focus of it depends on the geography. So again, as we talked about last week, the North had an economy that was based on industrialization, urbanization, shipping of goods into ports. So that's where they focus their energies for their own policing. So Boston PD was the first organized police department, and that was 1838, according to our research. Again, it was economically driven, and it went from being rich people paying these poor degenerates, as they looked at them, to protect the rich people. It wasn't an individual anymore. They switched it so that it was a collective. They switched that financial burden from just, hey, I'm a rich person, I need to pay for poor people to protect me. And they shifted it to the entire citizen group through taxes and like a collective of financial resources to make sure that they didn't have to shoulder that financial burden on their own. And two, they sold it as, hey, like everyone's going to benefit from this now. So now we have a police department here in Boston, and that happened in New York City, that happened here in Philadelphia, that happened all across the northern part of the then colonies. Actually, no, those were now the United States, but the northern part of the United States. In the South, we had to talk about economy again, and slavery was the economy. The entire economic system of the South was based on slavery, was based on the creating, farming, harvesting, selling of cotton. And the people who were doing that were free labor, not looked at as people, but looked at as property. So in the South, they had slave patrols to police the safety and of the property that were the slaves. And not safety in the sense that, hey, we want to make sure that you have the resources and you're getting the food and the clothing and the shelter that you need. That's not the safety I'm talking about. The safety that I'm saying the slave patrol was in charge of was making sure that slaves did not run away. Okay? And if they did run away, they were brought back and they were punished. So slave patrol is a nice way to say it, which sounds so weird to say slave patrol is nice, but basically they were slave catchers.
Yes, they were set up. I think of it more like bounty hunters. If
yes, that's perfect. Slave hunters, bounty hunter.
Dog the Bounty Hunter, but 1700s, where they were literally just like, oh, your property ran away, like we'll go get it back for you. Mm-hmm. And I think that they also masked not only the return of property, but like the potential fear of retaliation and violence.
Absolutely.
Like I think that Black people were like judged, but judge isn't the right word, but like the commodification of like a Black person's body, which like I think we do to the same today with like athletics, but like that there are these people and they are, you know, strong athletic people that was like weaponized against them as well, as much as the South and like the system of slavery took advantage for economic growth. They also weaponized these people's bodies. And so you had these slave patrols that were like, well, yes, like we're going to return your property to you because it's your property. And like, that is of our moral ground, but also be scared because these are, you know,
these are dangerous
people. Like, look how strong they are, you know, like these Black men, they're so strong. Like they're going to come for you and your children and your wife. Like they're like this weaponization, I think.
That's not a thought. It's fact. Like that. It was a part of.
And so like that
is part of the system. Like, it was part of the system. Then it's part of the system now.
Yeah.
The weaponization.
You're scared. Be scared. Be scared because
the weaponization and demonization of Black life, Black bodies has not gone away. Right. So say that it has not gone away. We'll talk about what police are tasked to do now. So thank God there's no more slave patrols. There's no more slave hunters. But police today are not all that different in the sense that they are still in charge of ensuring the good of the people in charge, right? If you, in a utopic society, police would not do what police do today in the sense of what they're tasked to do in relation to what they're trained to do. Police are supposed to be in charge of people with mental health, people with substance abuse problems, people, domestic violence. They're supposed to handle traffic. They're supposed to handle car accidents. They're supposed to handle way too many things. There's way too much on their plate for a profession that only is required to go into training for anywhere between 8 and 29 weeks.
Oh, that's even less than I thought. I thought it was like 6 months. Yeah, and you look at these foreign countries, like I don't know if you saw, it was, again, sorry, I'm not citing the source correctly. It was something I saw on Instagram, so again, take it with a grain of salt. But it was like a post that was talking about how like Sweden, you have to have 3 years of like training and education on police work before you enter the force.
Yeah.
And I said 6 months, and you're like, it's 29 weeks max. Like even that is a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Huge. And then you have to think about in that 8 to 29 weeks, what is actually being taught and how does that align with what you as a police officer are going to encounter? There's just too much of a gap because, and you'll see this in some of the stories that we're going to share later on, but police they're just not equipped to handle the issues that they're called to handle on. And also they're militarized. Like there's, to me, no reason that a police officer here in the States is carrying around the same artillery and weaponry as a military soldier who is on foreign ground to fight terrorism. Why do you need the same equipment as a soldier when you are policing in your own community. It just does not equate. There's no way that you can convince me that those tools, there's two separate missions, okay, between a police officer and a soldier. So those two separate missions should require and call for two separate weapons or two separate set of tools and resources. They should not be nearly as synonymous as they are if the police system was made correctly in the way that would actually solve the mission of protecting and serving its community.
Right. I think that we answered this when we talked about our different experiences and how we were taught about like what the police are supposed to be, right? Like I was taught, hey, as a child, if something goes wrong, if I get like separated from my parents or whatever, find a police officer or a mom. Like like they're supposed to help you, which like, yes, like we want members of the community to help with a situation like that. But the fact that like what I was taught and what you were taught were so starkly different is an issue in the way that like, and again, you can be a good cop, but if we're teaching our children for their safety and the fact that we have two kids, and their safety and what their safety looks like and how they need to move about in the world are so vastly different because of the common denominator of police work, like it's
a problem.
That's a problem. And we need to figure it out. We're not saying that all cops are bad or whatever. It's let's take a step back. Let's check our ego at the door and just look at the facts.
I mean, and you said it perfectly. Not all cops are bad. All cops are not racist. They are not bad people. They do not have bad intentions. There are some people who are good cops and got on the force to
help their community.
Try to fight this system from the inside and also protect and serve their community. That is full stop a fact. Okay? And the issue with that is that when good cops try to fight the system from within, they're more often than not, they're punished. They're ignored first. They're tried to be coerced to change their stance. And if they don't do that, then they're punished either by being fired, having their pension stripped away, having to be relegated to a less desirable detail so that they're doing something that they don't want to be doing or something that is, beneath them as far as like the time that they've put on the force, the results they've had on the force. They're put at almost like back at the starting blocks. So we've got, there's stories about this. You want to talk about Cariol Horn?
You go through the Rolodex of all of the, right. So I think even before we get into that, I think there's one thing, like if you are a good cop, as I'm saying this, it sounds like a Cosmo article. Like if you're a good cop, like what do you do? A how-to guide, something stupid like that. Sorry, that's the way my brain works. I think the one thing too that we need to think about is like when we think about George Floyd's murder and you saw those cops, those other 3 cops just standing around while he was dying, I think that there's something really interesting about like it's not just an issue within policing, but I would argue across the board, like you think about yourself and your job, but like seniority and like the role of seniority and what that looks like and the ability for people to speak up at any time. And like
I don't know how many people know, Kaitlin. I think you and I have talked about it, but at least one of those officers who was not Derek Chauvin, who was on George Floyd's neck, at least one of the surrounding officers, it was his first week on the job.
Yeah, I think it was like his 4th day or something.
So if you want to talk about a system being corrupt, that is not the training that you should be receiving. You should not be like, as a human, he should have been big enough to say, hey, get off him. But if you want to relate this to other jobs, like you're not going to be on your first week on a job and call out a senior level person who's supposed to be training you and supervising you. So we have to buck the system in order for people to have the ability and like know that they're not going to be punished for doing the right thing, because it makes it damn near impossible to know that you have to continue to put food on your plate for yourself, for your family, cover your bills, cover your mortgage, do all these things with the job that you put time and effort into getting. You have like that definitely crosses your mind. If you are a good person and you want to do something, when you're seeing people around you and people in positions like yours being punished for doing the right thing, it makes it very difficult. No way, shape, or form am I excusing any of the officers that were there that stood by and watched this happen. I'm attacking the system, and I'm not explaining away or accepting their lack of action. I'm attacking the system and making it very known that the system makes it this way, that good cops have to sacrifice so much to step up. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing that happened with Eric Garner, the previous black man that was murdered by a chokehold, who said the same exact thing that George Floyd said: "I can't breathe." Mm-hmm. Like, you rewind 4 years ago, and it was the same exact situation. Other officers standing around while one officer is choking and murdering a black man on video recording in the streets in broad daylight.
Yeah.
Other officers failed to act.
Right.
And how did that happen? Were they all just bad people? Were they all racist people who did not care about his life at all? Or were they, or is it in conjunction? That could be true. It's not negating the truthfulness in that fact, but it's also has to change from this system. Not one cop can't change that.
Right. And I think if you're struggling with like putting yourself in like those officers' shoes, not saying anything because you're right, like they should have absolutely said something. Think about your job. Like, and what I try to do, and maybe it's selfish, but it just helps me understand, is like, if I don't understand something, I try to relate it back to myself as much as I possibly can. So think to yourself, you're at your job and I don't know, whatever, something happens and you know that it's wrong. Like, if you were not brought up, which like I have worked for a person who encouraged us to speak out and say, like, when you're a member of a team, you have the obligation to dissent. We may not go with your answer and you need to present it in a nice way. You know, don't be an asshole and be like, fuck all of you, you're wrong, my way is right. But as a member of the team, you have got to say when something is wrong or you think that we're going in the wrong direction. Because if you're in a sales job and like there's a pitch going out, but you think there's something missing, like say it, because it could help get the client. Right. In this circumstance, it's, hey, like you're hurting this person. That's not what we're supposed to do.
You're not protecting, you're not serving.
Right. But if you don't have, and like,
it's the support system, right?
Support system. And I can only relate to this as like a female in predominantly male dominated industries. So take that for what you will. But like I was encouraged, and I'm not a shy or quiet person, but there were times where I would hold back in meetings. So I'm just like, whatever, you know, like I just won't comment because other people are talking and I just don't think that I need to say anything. And I was encouraged to say something, and I like am really appreciative of that lesson because I feel much more confident in saying something. All that is to say is that like if you are not taught by whomever it is at your job or your teacher, whatever, those people in your life who are above you, helping you, mentoring you, teaching you to speak up, you're not, how are you supposed to know to have like the courage to do that? Because I understand, and again, to your point, we're not condoning their actions. It's more explaining it. And I'm trying to like make you empathize with, well, maybe I can see how that could happen. It's not good. We're not saying that by any stretch of the imagination that these people aren't culpable and responsible for their actions. But like, if it's this guy's fourth day on the job, like.
And also like it relates directly where we're going next. Like I mentioned Carrie L. Horn before. The system did not do her any favors when she did the right thing. The right moral thing is exactly what Carrie L. Horn did. So she was an officer and she had been on the force for, I believe, 19 years. Okay, so she was a senior officer, still patrolling, and there was a stop, an altercation broke out. It ended up with a black man being cuffed on the ground and being choked. by a white officer. Officer Cariel Horn realized that this man was in distress. He was already cuffed. He was on the ground. He was not resisting. He was no longer a threat to anyone at all. Okay? So once that happens, there's no need for any type of force. You're cuffed. You're supposed to sit this person up. This is what you're trained to do. You're taught to sit this person up, either put them in the car or sit them up so that they have their hands behind their back. They're cuffed. They cannot move. There's no threat of them getting away. There's no threat of them harming you at this point. But this officer continued to choke this man, who was, again, no longer a threat. Cariel Horn did the right thing. She grabbed this officer, pulled him off this man. She did not strike him. She did not disrespect him. And I mean him as in the other officer.
Right.
When this story got reported back to the higher-ups, Cariel Horn was punished. She was fired from her job, and when she tried to make waves about it and like share her story, the department stripped away her pension. She's a mother of 5, a single mother of 5, who no longer had a job, was blackballed from getting a job at other police departments, and her pension that she had rightfully earned over the course of almost 2 decades was taken away because she did the right thing. And this story happened in, I wish I had this up in front of me, the exact date of when this happened, but this is resurfacing because she saved someone's life. That man would have ended up potentially being the same fate as Eric Garner and as George Floyd and any other person who died at the hands of a police chokehold. Chokeholds and strangleholds are not part of the job. Although they're allowed in way too many departments, they're starting to be banned across the country, which is great. But why did it take so much? Why couldn't it have been that she did the right thing in her personal situation, saved a man's life? They had the suspect arrested. Why did it have to get to where it got to? And why does it continue to happen time and time again?
Right. This was also, thanks CBS News, this was in 2008.
Okay.
That she lost her job. Unfortunately. I think the shocking thing to me also, I don't have a source for this. I was just listening to this podcast called Guys We Fucked. They're very great female comedians, like 10 out of 10 recommend. But they recently did, it's like a feminist sexuality podcast, but these women are fantastic in supporting and like understanding their voice. So basically they live in New York. They had they're also comedians. So if you listen to them and you're like, wow, these people are like, what? They're saying some weird stuff. They're being funny. But they had a whole podcast episode called like NYPD Suck Our Dicks. And they were basically just talking about like, they've gone to all the protests. They're educating themselves. They're doing all the right things. They were aware, but they're continuing to educate, and they were using their platform to just say, listen, like, speaking mainly to white female listeners, a la myself, hey, wake the fuck up, figure it out. And they were talking about, you said like Officer Horn was like blackballed from getting into another police department. They had they were talking about how this system like protects their own, in that like, you hear a lot of stories about officers for any type of misconduct finding a new job.
Yeah.
In like a different, like literally like the county over or the city, whatever. And it's
the
like,
right thing. And since she wasn't part of protecting her own, as in the officer who was using excessive force, when she stepped out and spoke against him and stopped his action, then she stepped out of line according to the police department and the police departments, because no one else would hire her.
Right. And so it's like, I mean, to me, this sounds like the issue with like Catholic Church, and like we've all heard the stories about like these I almost said ministers, they're not ministers, but like, what are they called in sorry, I'm not Catholic.
Priests.
Why am I thinking of the priests? Yes, thank you. Sorry, my mind completely went blank. Like all of these priests assaulting these like young children and like moving them around and like taking them to other places. So it took forever for like the Boston Globe Spotlight team to like connect these stories and like help these survivors out. It's like the same thing where it's, okay, let's move these people around. Like they did something wrong. We either are not going to talk about it, or if we talk about it, let's move them somewhere else because we're protecting our own and we don't want the light shown on us that there's anything wrong in our department. Everything's fine. Like this is Mayberry, like Barney Fife and Andy Griffith. Like everything is fine. We're a happy little police department. Yeah. And like that's just not the case, and like wildly unfair.
And we want to make sure that our listeners, when you're having these conversations and you're speaking out against racism, you're speaking out against this corrupt system, we want to make sure that you have you're armed with the knowledge and the perspective to combat what people are going to say. People will say, oh, well, that was just one bad situation. I agree with you, but that doesn't happen all the time. So we have other situations to show that this is not an isolated incident. So we're going to go to a story about Sergeant Isaac Lambert. Goes by Ike Lambert. He's a sergeant at the Chicago Police Department. He has a pending lawsuit against the department for their failure to support him when he spoke out against police brutality. So the situation stems from an August 2017 incident involving an off-duty officer shooting an 18-year-old unarmed teenager named Ricardo Hayes. So Sergeant Lambert was in charge of, overseeing this shooting that, again, involved an off-duty officer he wasn't on the clock. He was not in uniform. He was not in his patrol car. He was just out in the morning and happened to see a young brown man who he did not think was in the right place at the right time. And when Sergeant Lambert spoke out about it, he was told to leave it alone, let it go, shut your mouth, and don't take this any further. A boy was shot by an off-duty officer for no reason. It was unjustified by all moral compasses. But when Sergeant Lambert spoke out about it, he was blackballed. So he says, here's his quote, "I've always spoke up against things that I thought was wrong within the department. But like you said, this culture right now, a lot of officers don't feel as though they can speak up because there's no real true mechanism that protects us from retaliation from our superiors. Unfortunately, right now, I'm a perfect example of that. I'm living proof that, if you speak out and it's not what the department wants you to conform to, you'll be punished or they'll take action against you. And you really have no resource unless you're strong enough to stand out there on the ledge. And a lot of people won't back you. They'll leave you out there for yourself. So that's it. It's different." And when he says it's different, like that really closes the circle for me in the sense that the police departments are different. They have different rules. The system gives them different rules to play with and navigate through life with. Like anyone else. So when the officer shot Ricardo Hayes, he was not an on-duty officer. He was just a person. Any other person just sees someone who looks like to that person, looks to them, the off-duty officer sees Ricardo Hayes looking like he does not belong. You cannot just go up and shoot a person. I can't walk out of my house and see someone I don't recognize, be like, "Oh, what are you doing here? I've lived here for a year. I haven't seen you." Pow. You can't fucking do that unless you are protected by a system that will protect you at all costs. If it comes down to not protecting and serving the people that you were sworn in to protect and serve.
It just, we hear these stories unfortunately all the time, and every single time, like jaw to the floor of just like, what the fuck? Like it's one of those things where it's like, I'm shocked because there's a continual loss of life and a complete and blatant disrespect for like just human life in general, but specifically like Black, brown, trans people. Like it's overwhelming, but like I'm not even surprised anymore, which is really
That's the worst part, is that it's no longer surprising. It's no longer, it's jarring and it's uncomfortable to see, but it's not like, even the frequency, you're just like, okay, it's been a couple months. Like, this is probably going to happen again, which is so messed up and disturbing that these murders are being normalized to the extent that they are, because they happen so frequently.
Yep.
And these are just the ones that we hear about.
And the reason we're hearing about these are because
they're caught on film.
And we can talk about this stuff with like good cops who are trying to do the right thing, is because they had the courage and the gumption, knowing that they weren't going to have, you know, protection from their superiors or the trust of their peers, but still pushing forward to do the right thing. Because I'm sure there are other people who want to do the right thing or trying to do the right thing, or did and lost their jobs, but were told like, don't be vocal and we'll, you know, we won't completely blackball you from your job, or we won't strip you from your pension like Officer Horn was. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of those circumstances that we just don't hear about because people are trying to figure out the right thing. Because you're right, like this is their livelihood. And a lot of people join the police force because they feel called to serve. Like, that's what this position
is. It's supposed to be a service job. It should be a community service job.
Right. You are there to uplift and support your community. And I believe that there are a lot of people, and I'm praying most people, that that's why they do it, right? They do it because they want to help, and they're invested in their communities, and they want to see people thrive and keep them safe from insert whatever threats.
And you want to talk about someone who served? The next former officer Lorenzo Davis, also of the Chicago Police Department for some time. He started off as a police officer, became a lawyer, and continued to try to use his experience, education, and platform to fight the system. So he started working for an independent agency, and the job of that agency from September, I believe it started in September 2007. I know it was 2007. Their mission was their stated mission was to research and provide findings for any police shooting. There were 400 fatal police shootings in the city of Chicago from 2007 until this agency was disbanded in 2018. And out of the 400, Kaitlin, I don't know if you know this, but out of 400, how many do you think of those were considered unjustified shootings?
When you say unjustified, you mean
unjustified by the agency.
Okay. Oh, by the agency.
Yes, after doing their research.
So a policeman shoots a person. Mm-hmm. The agency said, well, that was unjustified. Therefore, the police did something wrong. Sorry, I'm like. So
what percentage? So take the 400 out of it. Yeah. What percentage? If you just had to guess, because there's no way for you to get this.
Right. Like 10% of, I would say like 10% of the police shootings were quote unquote justified, and that they had gone through, in my head, that they, like Chicago PD said, okay, great, we've gone through every single step of training and de-escalation, which may or may not exist, I don't know. At this point, we have to draw our weapons. 10% of those, like 40 deaths, would have been justified because they went through everything.
Right,
like,
went through the entire process.
They went through every single step, and we tried to like calm the situation down, whatever. That's what I'm assuming.
So you would think that 40 were justified and the other 360 would be found to be unjustified?
Yes, as in the Chicago PD did something wrong.
You are so far off. You are incredibly inaccurate in your assessment of how this department and this agency were working. So out of the 400 from 2007 to 2018, 2 were considered to be unjustified. Just 2. So you thought it was 90% were going to be found to be unjustified? It was less than half. It was half of a percent. Half of 1%, so 0.5% for all the math experts out there, were found to be unjustified. The other 99 is like, so when we say like 99.9 and we generalize and throw that term around, for this particular situation, it was 99.5% of police shootings were found to be justified. And some of these were caught on video with no weapon found, no real reason for the stop to have occurred. Look at the story of Laquan McDonald in Chicago. It was caught on film. It was on film, an unarmed black man being shot, and it was considered justified by this agency. The agency was eventually dissolved because people spoke out against it. It was not serving its purpose. It was not.
Yeah, I have
basically it was covering for the police departments. It's independent and separate. But Lorenzo Davis, when he spoke out against this, Lorenzo Davis, again, former Chicago police lawyer, gets his job in this independent agency, was awarded $2.8 million because it came to be proven in a court that they settled for $2.8 million, so they did not have to go through the whole court process.
So he sued the agency and said
agency and was awarded
making up numbers or you're bending the truth.
So instead of admitting that they were wrong, they were like, okay, we'll admit we're wrong, and we're gonna shut this thing down, and we're gonna give you 2 minutes to try and like stop you from talking about it. That shit didn't work. He continued. Go ahead.
Out of curiosity, okay, so we're talking about this like agency. So was this agency hired by the Chicago PD to say, like, was this like an external investigation that the Chicago PD was like, hey, like citizens of Chicago, like, know that we're taking, like, we know what's happening?
It was more that than it wasn't a situation where like there was this organization, this agency already in existence that was completely separate from the incidences that were happening in Chicago. It was created in response to those by Chicago, by the Chicago local government, and the Chicago Police Department created this agency.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's not really
it's not truly it wasn't like a company or an agency over in Seattle, Washington is coming in as a consultant to oversee this. It was not that.
That's bad.
So, I mean, 3 examples right there that you can find for yourself from a simple Google search, that the system is not designed for good police it's not designed for great people to do the right thing and be good police. And you have to, that's another thing we kind of glossed over. Like, we have to talk about what makes a good police as defined by the police department and the policing system. A good police officer makes stops, makes arrests, gets convictions, and closes cases. And however they do that is up to them. Like, just put people behind bars.
I feel like, okay, and maybe this is like, again, different world, but when you talk about like what makes a good police officer, like I feel like, you know, when you're driving down the highway and it's like the end of the month, and then you just, for some rhyme or reason, feel like you see so many more like police cars, or like holiday weekends. Like, oh, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I understand like holiday weekends there's more traffic, which therefore could lead to congestion, which then could lead to accidents, whatever. So maybe that's the justification, and I'd be willing to be told that I'm wrong about what I'm going to say. But like the end of the month, like police officers, I don't know if this is true or not, but like the rumor was always like, well, they have to get a certain number of traffic stop, a certain number of speeding tickets. Therefore, like the end of the month, they're not at their quota yet. So I don't know if that's true or not. Literally, like I was told that all the time growing up. Like,
look, that could be a thing. It could differ from station to station, department to department, city to city.
To that point, like even as a rumor, that's telling us that, like there are quotas and numbers, and that you have to hit. Like this is all.
You have to ask what you're rewarding. What behaviors are being rewarded?
Right.
Is it finding justice, like absolute justice, unequivocal justice that the person who did what you say they did it? Or is it just enough to arrest someone for a crime and put someone behind bars?
Right.
Give this faux pas or like this faux justice that isn't real. And I know we were going to talk about a different story first, but I feel like we have to go with the Central Park Five.
Yes.
We have to tell this story because it fits so perfectly with what we're talking about right now.
Yes.
And those who don't know, the Central Park Five were 5 boys. I'm not even going to call them young men. I'm not going to call them men.
They were like 14 to 18.
14 to 16.
Of 16? Oh.
At the time of this occurrence. And only 2 of them knew each other. They were 5 black and brown people, boys, that happened to be in Central Park on the night of a terrible crime being committed. Okay? We're going to talk about it, but like, we are not blaming the victim in this situation by any means at all. We are simply attacking the system that punished all 6 of them. So the 5 boys, their families, the rest of their lives, their children that weren't even born at the time are still, feeling this and like dealing with the repercussions from a messed up system punishing these 5 boys. The white female woman who was victim of a terrible rape, she's also continuously impacted by it. You have to imagine that she's still impacted by this because it's coming up.
They don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, you're right.
But you're like, and you're feeling it.
I'm getting too into it.
But like, what if they don't know what it is?
Okay. Do you want to tell it? You want me to tell it? Should I keep going?
No, can I tell it? Because I
like. Go for it. You tell it. I'm gonna have to breathe a second because
you were like on a really good flow, but I was like half step back.
What are we talking about? Go for it. Tell us what we're talking about.
So, like Jordan mentioned, we're talking about this entire system being set up that it's rewarding the wrong things. And like, what does that look like? The best example we have, maybe not the best, but one of them we're clearly both very passionate about, is the Central Park jogger case. 1989, there was a young woman who was running in Central Park one evening. She was attacked, raped, beaten almost to death. She was in a coma for 12 days. And again, and we could have a whole episode where we talk about like how we treat different victims based on their race and gender. And you could even think back to what my parents told me about like how to interact with cops. Like, make sure that it is a police officer so you're not assaulted, because that could happen to you. But this poor woman was raped and beaten. She was unconscious. They didn't find her body till like 1:30 in the morning. Police officers did, like first responders. And based on, how badly she was beaten, she had like no true recollection of what happened to her, who her assailant was. And not that that's necessarily the burden that a survivor needs to have anyways, but anything to help solve a case, right? Clearly someone has done something very wrong here. There was a crime committed against a person, a very violent crime. Well, the New York City Police Department thought that there were a lot of black and brown teenage boys running around in Central Park that night. And they thought that, well, these guys have to be the people that did this to her. And they rounded up a bunch of them and started interviewing them and questioning them, but in such a way that they were not able to have a lawyer. They
14 to 16 years old, so they're minors. You cannot just.
They probably don't even know like what their rights are,
no idea what they do,
or to even comprehend. And like, let's just assume that Miranda rights were read to these people, which everyone should know. Like, those are like, you have the right to remain silent. Like, you don't have to say anything you don't want to. You have a right to counsel.
Can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Exactly.
If I was 14 and no one explained that to me, I would not understand what any of that meant, because one, it's read super fast. It's read in a way that the officer is just stating it to state it, not to make sure that there's comprehension.
Right. They state it because they know that they have to, which, like, okay, great. No, that should absolutely be told to every single person. That is a protection that you are given in America, full stop. We're not saying that should be changed. However, these kids didn't know and understand what was happening. They had been questioned for so long that 5 of them confessed confessed to this.
So,
but they were
the right word. They never, none of them really truly confessed to a crime. They confessed to being there. And so again, only 2 of the 5 knew each other. And the police officers came in with testimony saying that once they separated the 5, that this person said this, that you did this. So they would walk into a room with a boy handcuffed to a table, tell them that the boy that they heard getting physically abused in the other room admitted that he, the one they're talking to now, was the one who did the crime. And the boy who they just beat the hell out of in the other room, that this boy now has heard the physical abuse, heard him give up his name. And they basically, all the officers just, they created a story and got the boys to agree to parts of the story that would exonerate them while punishing and discrediting the other boy.
They created a narrative that fit what they thought happened.
What they wanted to believe.
So in the minds of these police officers, and like when I say like try to imagine this, like I can't fucking go there because I don't get it. But they tried to create a narrative to do what they thought was right, which was to solve this crime. They took their own assumptions and prejudices to put pieces together that didn't fit together. They had physical evidence, which again, this is late 80s, so DNA and all that kind of stuff, forensics, have come a very long way. So when we look back to those, like, I'll listen to podcasts and be like, oh my God, what the fuck? Like, this is like a 1970s murder. Like, why didn't you catch the guy? I mean, I'll give a little grace where grace is due in terms of like technology being very different. So when we talk about things now through the lens of a 2020 forensic lens, whatever, it's very different. But they had no evidence against these kids other than the fact that they were there. They
have no testimony, no confessions.
So basically they scare these kids into confessing
on behalf of each other.
Right. Then all of these kids days later withdraw everything, saying like, I didn't do that, because thank God, then they finally get out and get back, they realize what's happened. There's been this physical, emotional, and mental manipulation of young children to satisfy and check a box that this case has been solved. Meanwhile, we all know that this is, not true now. It's, again, hindsight bias is 2020, but we know this isn't true. We know that these kids didn't do it. But there was physical evidence that we can now test. It was tested in 2002 to say, like, none of these kids did it. This is not correct. And also, I will say this too, none of these kids accepted plea bargains, which...
Oh, they could have gotten out earlier.
They could have gotten out earlier.
They refused to admit that they
didn't do it. They didn't do anything. Eventually, there was someone caught, but it's like this horrible situation where a narrative was created because it fits someone's prejudice and their inherent biases. And we talked about it before, but like
it was literally by a miracle that this happened. So Corey Wise was, of the 5, the last one to be released from prison. He had served 13 years at this point, and he came across a man earlier in his time in prison named Matias Reyes. So Matias Reyes in the system runs into Corey Wise, knows why Corey Wise is in prison, because his tie and his conviction in the Central Park 5 rape case. Okay. Matias Reyes gets out of prison, comes back to prison after Corey Wise is
dangerous,
right?
Criminal.
Right now, he's in for 13 years, and this lifelong criminal, like you said, felt remorse and felt sorry that Corey Wise was still in prison because he's the one who committed the rape. And if that chance encounter hadn't happened, and Matias Reyes wasn't like, damn, like, I really fucked up this person's life, he's still here 13 years later after I committed a crime that I know I committed. When this information came to be known from Matias Reyes sharing it, they finally tested the DNA evidence they had for 13 years against Corey Wise. It never was a match for any of the Central Park Five. Semen and blood samples, no match ever. No blood on their clothes that were brought in, nothing. And, they test the samples versus Reyes. It's a perfect match. And finally, these 5 boys that are now men are, they're exonerated, but they also lost all of that time that they can never, ever get back. So, you can learn, you can read about this, you can, there's videos.
There's a bunch of documentaries, a bajillion podcasts.
So many things that you can dive more in on this, but the takeaway is that these boys were victims. They were punished. They were abused. They lost parts, like a chunk of their lives, years of their lives, because the way the system is designed is to put people behind bars by any means necessary.
And that, like, if the whole concept, which I think you and I would agree is both, but what we want, like, we all want everyone to live in healthy, safe, happy communities. If the objective of police work is to adhere to the safety, happiness, and the health of a community, when you do a bad job at your job, and unfortunately there are higher stakes, like Jordan and I make jokes about our work. We're not curing cancer. We're not saving lives. We're we enjoy our jobs very much, but when you work, when you're a doctor, like, your job is to save lives. When you're a police officer, your job is to save lives. They continued to let a serial rapist and murderer walk around freely, and albeit, like, he committed other crimes, but think about how many crimes could have been prevented from Reyes's future victims and survivors
if the cops
had they done their job.
That's it. It's done. That's the end. That's it.
Yeah.
You gave no justice to the jogger, to the woman who was a rape victim, rape survivor. You took the lives away from the 5 boys that you put in prison, and you let the actual criminal, the actual rapist, the actual abuser go on to do other crimes.
Right.
So there was zero justice served for any party involved.
Right. And stuff like that just seems to happen all the time. And these police officers, they just created a narrative. Like, that's what I keep saying. Like, they made something up that made sense to them. And literally the only reason it made sense was because they could put the boys in Central Park and they had these biases against them based on what they looked like. It just worked. And it feeds into this whole fear that I mentioned earlier, like the weaponization of, like, Black, I'm going to say men, because it's predominantly men. But, like, the weaponization of a Black man's body, like, great, cool, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't these 14-year-old kids assault this woman? Like, it doesn't make sense. Again, it's completely fucking asinine to me. And it's so frustrating because you're right. Like, nothing good happened. Your poor police work caused irreparable damage to so many people for the sake of you trying to, and, like, let's pretend under the guise of, like, yes, like, they were trying to do the right thing and they really, their hearts were in the right place or whatever. Okay, but if your hearts were in the right place, like, take a half step back. Look at the broader picture. Like, and again, I know it's 2020s. So I'm like, look at the fucking evidence. But, like, come on. No excuse.
Again, like, this is all about a system that is in place that rewards people putting other people in jail, whether they did it or not. The case was closed, and that was the result that the department wanted. So according to the system, they were acting as good cops. They were doing good police work because they got the convictions and the case was closed. And Kaitlin, I do want to just go back to one thing you said about this being predominantly the weaponization of Black men. We have to make sure we include the stories of our Black women.
Yes.
And one of the tragic stories around Black women right now is Breonna Taylor. If you haven't heard the name, you've been living under a rock. You've been avoiding what's going on around you at all costs. Because
pause. Also, if you didn't hear about it until June, maybe you weren't hiding under a rock. After June 2020, you hadn't heard about
it. Fair.
I want to ask just that because.
Fair. Okay, if in the past 31 days, 32 days, you haven't heard about Breonna Taylor, then that's on you. So I don't feel like we need to go super far into what happened, other than saying a warrant was set out for someone's arrest.
A no-knock warrant.
A no-knock warrant, which is, you literally just bust into someone's house.
Well, like, and also let's explain what a warrant is. Like, we've all watched, like, you've watched something, CSI, Cops, whatever. I think that, like, which we should have a whole episode on, like, cops in culture, because I think that could be something really interesting. But a warrant, like, you have to be presented, the judge has to say, like, yep, we're going to arrest you, or we are going to investigate your home because of this, and this. They knock on your door, you know that they're there, they present you with this information. Again,
they give you an opportunity to go calmly, or
right? Yes, like there's, I won't say freedoms because that's not what it is, but there are certain rules that
guidelines and restrictions
to protect everyone involved. A no-knock warrant, like, I'll let you explain that, but I just wanted to, like, make sure that we draw a very distinct line between.
So you alluded to it, but there's a process that's in place where you have to have probable cause to take to a judge to get a warrant that you carry with you when you go to serve the warrant, is when you actually show up to the property or the vehicle or wherever the warrant is for. When you physically show up, you have the warrant in hand. In a no-knock warrant, you do not have to present yourself. You do not have to present the warrant yourself. You literally can enter the building and say police, okay? In this situation, that's how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to bust down the door, enter, and announce yourself as police officers with a no-knock warrant. So once you're inside, you must say police. Give people an opportunity to put their hands up to surrender. This is not what happened in this case with Breonna Taylor. They bust down her door. Officers immediately, without announcing themselves as police officers, start shooting. Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, when they were in their bedroom, reaches for his legal weapon and starts returning fire because, again, people unannounced broke into their home and started firing.
Like, they have no idea what's going on.
The amount of terror that you have to feel when that happens, I can't even imagine. But I would react the same way. You have the right to protect your home. And these officers did not say that they were officers. Okay? So there's a breakdown before we even get to this point. So the warrant is given for probable cause to go arrest a criminal or a suspect. Okay? That suspect had already been apprehended. The person that the probable cause was against was already in custody. So there it just stopped.
No connection. It was like the apartment complex that Breonna and her boyfriend lived in was miles away from where the suspect lived and was apprehended.
Right.
So, like, you are so off base in so many ways.
You're off base before any bullets are fired. Before any shots are fired, before any bullets are caught. You're already off base. Okay? The next time they're off base is when they show up, bust down the door, and don't announce themselves. Even on a no-knock warrant, you still must announce yourself as a police officer. Okay? So another complete disregard for the rules that are in place within this system. Okay? So it's not a lawless system that's just not enforced. Okay? And then they fire shots, I believe 30 shots either into her apartment or the apartment next door. So not only did they shoot Breonna Taylor 8 times, they shot other bullets that did not happen to strike her into her apartment, and they put the 3 lives in the apartment next door in danger by shooting bullets into that apartment. Okay? An officer who was inside was shot because there were officers outside shooting fucking blindly, unable to see what they're shooting at, just going fucking ham, shooting at whatever they want. It's completely unacceptable. Like, I'm so at a loss for words to try to explain anything because there's no way to explain how asinine and stupid this whole situation is. And it's so fucked up because it resulted in a loss of life of someone who was minding their own business, was a good person, went to the University of Kentucky, was an EMT, was doing everything right, and has her life ended. There's no more life for her. There's nothing left to her story because they ended it. And the people that did this are receiving zero consequences. So it does not matter. Like, a good cop can't go and arrest the cops who shot and killed Breonna Taylor because the system does not allow it. If the system worked correctly, these officers would have all been fired, they would have all been arrested, and they would all be convicted of murder, because that's what this is. It's 100% a murder. So far, there has been one single firing of a police officer. So not only should the people who were there shooting aimlessly, blindly, and illegally into this apartment, they all should be in jail. The people who allowed for this warrant, this no-knock warrant, to be served should also be in jail, given the fact that the person they were going to pick up was already in jail. What were you going there for?
There's a lack of
neglect.
Complete lack of communication. Like, I don't do your job. Like, again,
anyone else fucked up their job that bad, they would not have a job.
No, like, I cannot like overemphasize enough that, like, albeit I'll say it till I'm blue in the face, like, Jordan and I, our jobs don't involve life and death. Like, we work in sports and entertainment. Like, trust us, it's not that big of a deal. However, I promise you that if whatever the equivalent of that level of fuckery for, I don't know what that would even look like.
There is none.
Like, I really don't know if I could equate it to anything, but I can promise you.
You would get fired for way less.
Yes.
For way less.
Like, no. Absolutely not. That's inexcusable. And also, like, how fucking unorganized are you that you can't communicate out to your officers? Like, we got the guy, we're good. Also, how bad was your intel that you were, like I said,
miles away,
so far off,
fucking close?
And so then, so when this all happened, I asked, we don't know everything, I asked a friend of mine who's a lawyer, and I was like, this is what I think I know about, like, no-knock warrants. Like, I trust you more because, like, you went to law school and you practice. Like, am I off base in what I'm thinking that this is fucking stupid and seems very dangerous for everyone involved? And they were like, oh no, it is the dumbest thing in the entire world. It makes no sense. It's a loss of life for everyone.
Also, very rarely allowed to be served at night. Very rarely are these signed off on to be served at night.
And this person was like, it just makes not a lick of sense. Like, they don't make sense. This is not how we should do things. There's no, the reason they were created was basically to make sure that, like, if there was someone who had a bunch of drugs, like, you can't flush your drugs in the toilet. Like, right. That was the why behind it. And he's like, we don't need that. We can figure it out. There are other ways for us to do good police work and not put lives in danger. And if you're concerned about blue lives, like, hashtag all lives matter, 1, fuck off. 2, you should know that, like, no-knock warrants put those people at risk too. Like, it's
asinine. It makes no sense.
Yes, that's, like, exactly what I was going to say. Get out of my brain. It's fucked up. It's stupid. It's also, like, I don't know. Just, we'll have a call to action at the end, but, like, get your shit together. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, you're like, she was a good person. It also doesn't matter.
Doesn't fucking matter. Doesn't matter.
Worst fucking person in the world. I'm so sorry. Like, it does not mean that the police get to just kill you while you're sleeping in your bed, or
absolutely not
when you're under arrest.
The reason I said that is, like, because she had such a great.
Oh no, true. I mean,
and I just want to make sure that was clear. Like, I'm not saying, yes, I know that you know that. I want to make sure that everyone else knows that.
No. Yeah. I mean, she was an EMT. Like, she was helping with COVID. Like, great person, but that doesn't even I mean, it matters because we want to humanize her to be more than just her death, because I think that's super important when we're talking about
Absolutely.
deaths.
Absolutely.
But like, fuck that noise, Louisville.
Do you get your shit together? So we talked about the Central Park Five to illustrate what is rewarded in this policing system. What defines a good cop in the policing system? We talked about Breonna Taylor to show that there's no way for the good cops to punish the good people who are police officers. Cannot be good cops because the system does not allow them to arrest these people that committed a murder. The system also does not know how to police itself, because if it did and it was working correctly, all of these people would be fired, arrested, and convicted. Okay? It goes back to what we said before, protecting your own within that system. And the last piece that we want to talk about today is the lack of training and preparation that the police officers are receiving to deal with a very diverse population, diverse in race, diverse in gender, diverse in age, and just overall not trained to deal with anyone who has any type of difference. Is that fair to say when we started talking about Elijah McClain?
Yeah, I would say like sensitivity towards like people on the spectrum, like cognitive, and I'm not, I think that those things are, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I think that we as a society are getting better about talking about women. We're getting better. We're not great. I will never champion saying that we're great, but we're getting better about having conversations about women. We're learning now about race. If you didn't know now, like if you didn't know what the podcast was about, oh, there it is. But I think that we are, as a country, still very, very, very far behind, further behind than any others on like disability. And like that in of itself is a very wide and encompassing thing, and way of personality, like cognitive disabilities, like being on the autistic spectrum, like all of that type of stuff. We're really super, super, super far behind on, and understanding how to relate and interact with any person that is different in that way.
So specifically, before we go too much further into that, I kind of got emotional and into explaining what happened to the Central Park Five. I want to make sure that it doesn't happen with you and the story of Elijah McClain.
Yeah.
It's this story.
Are we passionate people? What? That's news.
Too passionate? What? A story of a young Black man who is on the spectrum, as Kaitlin alluded to, being officers were called because there was a suspicious person. 3 officers show up, and Elijah McClain, again, is on the spectrum. He explains to them, 1, I'm an introvert. I am uncomfortable in this situation. I am afraid. He says, I have my music on. He was listening to music. I'm listening to music. I cannot hear your commands. I want to turn my music off. So he's compliant. He's not doing anything that is causing anyone any type of harm. The officer should not be uncomfortable around him. And he ends up in cuffs. He ends up in a chokehold. He ends up losing consciousness. Okay, so this is another Black man. I have to look and see how old he was. I feel so weird calling him a man because I believe he was.
I think he was.
Regardless of age, he was doing
23.
nothing wrong.
Yeah, I thought he was in his 20s. 23.
He's 23. He has, these known mental challenges and like disabilities. He was no harm to anyone. He was minding his own business when the police showed up. He continued to obey what they were saying, being compliant. He ended up being put in a chokehold, losing consciousness, and being pronounced brain dead 3 days later. There are, again, 3 officers on the scene, none of which did anything to stop the situation, none of which provided any type of support for Elijah when he said when he admitted that he was an introvert and was uncomfortable in the situation. None of that happened. So again, 3 officers who were not trained effectively and adequately to deal with someone with Elijah's mental condition. So why were they called, and why were they the only ones there to handle the situation? Police are not trained. So either we need to train the police to understand and acknowledge when someone has these issues, or they should not be showing up. At minimum, they should not be showing up alone. They should be showing up with someone who is trained in that capacity, or they shouldn't be showing up for that at all in that capacity. It makes sense to me to have someone who, a trained professional who can acknowledge and recognize when someone has a mental disability. The police can be there for safety of that person and of the situation, but they should not be the ones primarily in charge of that situation. You should, again, it goes back to the mission. Someone showing up to me to come and interact with me who has a taser on one hip, a baton on that hip, handcuffs in their back pocket, and a gun on their other hip, 3 of those soldiers showing up to try and tell me to calm down in my own state of mind is going to have me in a very alarmed state.
Right.
Now, you add in the fact that Elijah McClain and so many other people are on the spectrum of mental disability.
I don't know that his family has like said specifically that he's on this. I could be wrong.
Like, okay, so even if it's not his.
So I think that he was like, they said that he was anemic, which is why he had the ski mask on, because he was cold, and that his family has used the word sensitive. So like, I don't want us to like, either way, it doesn't fucking matter. It really doesn't, because this person was complying and doing everything correctly. And I think that there's a whole, like I said, there's a whole conversation to be had about disability in America and what that does. But I don't want us to say, like, to conjecture or.
Right, okay.
So if we can find a source that maybe says that specifically, okay, cool. But I don't, his family just said that he was sensitive and that, like, he was a very, like, calming person, enjoyed being around animals. Like, I don't.
Right. We don't know 100% for sure.
Right. So I just want to.
But these, not these particular officers, but officers in general are called to deal with people that deal with mental health issues. Mm-hmm. That in and of itself, when you're seeing someone who is a soldier coming to engage with you, as opposed to seeing someone that you know is there to help you and comfort you through a situation, your experience is going to be very different. Okay. And that's really the end of what I was saying at that point. Like, it's about using the right tools for the right mission and the right objective, and sending armed officers to any situation where they're their primary contact with someone with mental disabilities, especially when that person is cooperating and just trying to stay calm and stay alive. It does not make sense. And that needs to change. It absolutely needs to change.
Yeah. I could not agree more.
And so we talked about Elijah McClain, Breonna Taylor, the Central Park 5, all for 3 specifically different reasons, and as evidence that this system is not designed to protect and serve those that it says it's here to protect and serve. So that is why we say that good cops are not enough. So the title question this week was, why aren't good cops enough? And we laid out that they're not trained to deal with the situations they're tasked to train with. There is no way for people who see something wrong to do or say anything about it without facing retaliation and repercussions for stepping out of line and not protecting the system. So once you do that, once you go and attack the system, you're punished for it. So there's no way to fight it from within and be successful and not put yourself at risk. And then the system cannot police itself. So even in the case of Lorenzo Davis, where he went from being a police officer to getting a law degree to working for what he thought was an independent agency that was supposed to, fight police brutality and, find whether or not a police killing was just or unjust, 2 out of 400, 0.5%. So you can't, the system should not be policing itself. Next week, we're going to talk about, now that we've identified that just having good cops to, be a part of the system is not enough. We're going to talk about what do we do about the bad system and the bad police. So Kaitlin, you want to go ahead and take us into our before we go into the segment, there's just one thing I want all of the listeners to know about Kaitlin Floyd. We have to put this out there. Okay, and I hope you know exactly where I'm going with this.
I don't. I'm getting very uncomfortable, and my face.
I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. It's something that you and I have talked about many, many times.
Okay.
It's something that we will never, ever agree on. And it is the way that you pronounce the word lawyer. So for those who heard her say lawyer earlier, she was trying to say lawyer.
Okay, blah, 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 blah. Literally, what do they practice? Law. It's a lawyer.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's a lawyer, and that's fine. We will never agree on this. I just wanted to clarify so that they didn't think you were making up a word, that you were stroking out, that you were.
We need to have subtitles when my
we
might
need to have
what Kaitlin means.
Have some southern subtitles.
Listen, I work really hard to hide it. Just when I get really excited or drink, it just
it definitely comes out. But I just wanted to clarify that for everyone. And Kaitlin, do you want to do the what you did?
I think you should do this one. We can take turns.
All right, cool. My turn. I'm hype. I was hoping you were gonna let me do this one. I just felt like
it's mine. It's mine.
So this week's What You Didn't Learn in Class is about qualified immunity. And qualified immunity is a judicially created protection, basically. It shields government officials from being held personally liable for constitutional violations. So if someone who is a government official works for a government entity, a municipality, a city, a state, a federal level government, it protects them from being liable on their personal assets. Their personal lives are not affected. So the way that this comes into play with policing is when these officers commit these crimes and they have to pay out. The departments have to pay out for the error of their ways, whether that is police brutality, whether that is a murder. It does not hold the individual liable, okay, financially. So they can commit this crime, they can be fired, they can be dismissed, they can choose to resign, but they can still collect their pension, which is one of the biggest perks and benefits of being a police officer. You work for 20 years and you get a certain percentage of whatever you made. So I know for the state police in Pennsylvania, you work for 20 years and you get 75% of your highest year's salary. So say you work a lot of overtime, 1 year you make $150,000. You're going to get 75% for the rest of your life. And that's great because if you are on the job, you do everything right, you serve, you protect, you've put your life on the line, you should be protected for the rest of your life. I'm okay with that. But we also need to have things in place where that the people who are messing it up, the bad apples that are, they're committing crimes. They are committing violence against the people they're supposed to be protecting and serving, but they can still collect that pension because they're not personally liable. The department will pay out for these settlements, but the individual does not. That is a very clear and easy way to start reforming this system, because when you put the personal responsibility on the officer, they're going to have to think about, damn, if I abuse this person, if I choke this person, if I strike this person, if I kill this person for no reason, I could be personally affected, and it's going to impact my family. It's going to impact our ability to provide for ourselves financially for the rest of our lives. That's a very quick, clear, easy way to shift the system in the right direction. So if you did not learn that in class, thanks for listening to Talk the Talk, because now you know.
Whoa. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
There are good people. There are great people that go into police work for the right reasons. And those great people are not able to stop the injustice in the system. So next week, we're going to tell you what we need to do to dismantle it and reform it and make the system right. I'm good. I'm done. I'm it. I'm out. I think we did it. Oh, well, wait, we have to clearly answer the question.
Oh, you're right.
The good cops are not enough. And if you still have questions, let us know, or just hit rewind and listen to this whole thing over again, because I feel like we really, really did a great job explaining why they are not enough in this system.
This is very true. Our call to action. So one thing that's super important for myself and Jordan every week is that we give you something that you can do to make a difference, whether it be with yourself, with your community, with our country, whatever that looks like. Last week, we asked you to watch or rewatch the 13th. Still haven't done that. Highly recommend. This week, we're asking that you help us fight the injustice against Breonna Taylor. We talked about it. We clearly care a lot about it. Do what you can and do your part. Sign the petitions. Call. We're in our notes on this episode. We're going to have an email address for you to reach out to, a phone number to call, petitions to sign, to get some semblance of justice for Breonna and for her family. It's, again, we hit on it. It's pretty fucking obvious that this was an egregious act and misstep, putting it lightly,
We're putting it lightly.
And these people, we all need to be held accountable for our actions, right? I believe that at least to be true. And we think that's true. And we want people I don't even know how to, I don't even like.
A badge does not give you the right to not be held.
What these people need to pay for what they've done.
Absolutely.
Right? I'm not saying that in a malicious way, like out for blood. No, it's just, you did something wrong. Here are the repercussions of that action. And we think that's really important. There are a lot of people in this country who think it's really important. So we encourage you to exercise your voice. That's one thing that people can't take away from you. So do your part. Make the call. It's super easy. Send the email.
Go to the website, justiceforbreonna.org. Go there now. Your phone's in your hand or within reach. Pick it up, do it, and have others do it, and continue to do it. And hopefully we can continue to fight and demand and get justice for Breonna. I think that's it for this week. I don't think we have like a cool sign off yet. So I'm just going to say thanks for listening and peace.
It's still recording. Ugh.